The hot sun beat down on the dusty path as she guided her small, weathered wagon toward the sprawling ranch that lay beyond the rolling hills. Her heart was heavy with a mixture of hope and fear. After years of disappointment, heartbreak, and the cruel words of doctors, she had come here seeking not just work, but a place where she might belong. She had been told she couldn't have children, and the weight of that truth had left her hesitant to dream of a family, of love, or of a future that felt warm and complete. But something about this ranch place she had heard whispers about in town, where a widowed cowboy raised several children on his own, spoke to a part of her that had long been silent. As she neared the main house, she noticed the wide porch, weathered and sun-bleached. Rocking chairs lined up as if waiting for someone to sit and watch the world go by. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, hinting at a life of quiet routines and simple comforts. The ranch was alive with the sound of animals, horses neighing in the corral, the lowing of cows in the distance, and the occasional bark of a dog patrolling its territory. Each sound brought a strange sense of peace. Here, life seemed tangible, steady, and dependable, everything she had longed for. Her wagon creaked as she pulled to a stop near the barn. She climbed down, brushing the dust from her hands and her skirt. The ranch smelled of hay, earth, and leather, a scent so foreign yet oddly comforting. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. This was unfamiliar territory, and though her determination was strong, the fear of rejection lingered at the edges of her mind. Would this cowboy accept her? Would the children even like her? More importantly, could she ever find a place here where her inability to have children might make her feel inadequate or unwanted? Before she could dwell too deeply on her fears, movement caught her eye. A tall, broad-shouldered man appeared at the barn door. Dust clung to his boots, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms tanned and strong from years of hard work. His eyes, however, held a softness that belied the rugged exterior, a warmth she didn't expect. He regarded her with quiet curiosity, but there was no judgment in his gaze, only the steady, calm presence of someone used to taking life as it came. She swallowed, unsure whether to introduce herself or simply hope he would speak first. He tilted his head slightly, as though inviting her to talk, and she forced a small, polite smile. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was hesitant, carrying both shyness and the faint tremor of vulnerability. She explained that she had come seeking work, a chance to start over, and perhaps a place to belong. He nodded thoughtfully, listening intently, his expression patient and unhurried. There was no rush, no expectation, just an acknowledgement that she existed in this moment, that her presence mattered. Even from this first encounter, she sensed that this place and the people within it might offer something she had been missing for so long: stability, kindness, and a sense of purpose beyond herself. The wide expanse of the ranch stretched before her, promising not just labor and responsibility, but also the possibility of belonging, of being part of a family that might accept her wholly, without reservation. Though uncertainty still lingered in her chest, there was also a small spark of hope, a belief that perhaps, for the first time in her life, she had come somewhere she could truly call home. As she took a step toward the barn, the cowboy's quiet nod encouraged her forward. In that moment, surrounded by the rhythm of ranch life and the gentle gaze of the man who would soon become central to her life, she felt a tentative but real sense of possibility. Perhaps this was the beginning, not just of a job, but of a life she hadn't dared to imagine, where she might find acceptance, love, and the warmth of a family waiting to embrace her. The morning after her arrival, the ranch seemed even more alive than the day before. Birds chirped from the trees lining the property, and the soft rustle of the wind through the tall grasses created a gentle, comforting rhythm. She stepped outside, carrying a small bundle of freshly baked bread for the children she had met briefly the day before. Her nerves buzzed with anticipation, mixed with an awkward uncertainty. She had seen the cowboy only in passing, strong, silent, and kind, but she hadn't yet spoken with him at length. Today that would change. She found him at the edge of the corral, tending to a young colt that had been skittish all morning. The horse stamped nervously, and the cowboy moved with steady patience, his hands firm yet gentle as he guided the animal. Watching him, she noticed the calm authority he commanded not through force, but through a quiet understanding of the creatures and the world around him. There was a rhythm to his movements, a natural grace that came from years of experience. She couldn't help but admire him, even as a small pang of apprehension tugged at her heart. Finally, he noticed her. The colt, sensing the change in attention, settled slightly, and the cowboy turned toward her, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. His gaze was direct, but there was no harshness in it, only curiosity and a subtle warmth that made her cheeks flush. She swallowed, suddenly self-conscious of her own uncertain stance, the way she clutched the bread, and the nervous tremor in her voice when she greeted him. "Good morning," she said, her voice tentative but polite. I brought some bread for the children." He gave a small, approving nod. "They'll be glad. You've got a good hand for baking, then." His tone was casual, but there was a hint of interest, a subtle invitation to speak further. She relaxed slightly, encouraged by his lack of judgment. "I've baked all my life," she admitted. "Back home. It was something I could do, something that kept me busy when everything else felt uncertain." Her voice faltered briefly, and she quickly looked away, hoping he wouldn't notice the vulnerability in her expression. He followed her gaze with a gentle understanding. "Well, they'll appreciate it." "And so will I," he said, his lips quirking into a small, easy smile. There was a depth to his eyes, a patience that made her feel unexpectedly safe. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen not just as a helper or a guest, but as a person with her own experiences and worth. The children appeared then, bounding across the yard in a burst of laughter and energy. The youngest tripped over his own feet, and she caught him before he hit the ground, laughing softly. The cowboy watched silently, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Her heart lifted as she saw him in this quiet moment, not just as a figure of authority, but as someone who cared deeply for these children, someone who had built this life with both strength and tenderness. The first conversation continued with small talk about the chores for the day, the animals that needed attention, and the weather. But beneath the mundane details, there was a subtle exchange of understanding. She realized he wasn't just assessing her as a potential worker. He was observing her character, her patience, and her willingness to engage with his family. And she, in turn, began to see the layers beneath his rugged exterior, the kindness, the dedication, and the silent longing for companionship that mirrored her own by the time the children had finished their breakfast and scampered off to play. There was a quiet connection between them. Words had been exchanged, but more importantly, trust had begun to form. She sensed that he respected her for who she was, flaws and all, and that he wasn't intimidated by her past or her inability to have children. In this simple, ordinary morning, the foundation of something more profound had been laid, a tentative, cautious first step toward understanding, acceptance, and perhaps even love. The days that followed her arrival at the ranch became a gentle rhythm of work, observation, and quiet discovery. At first, she moved cautiously, careful not to overstep or assume a role she hadn't yet earned. The cowboy had given her space, allowing her to find her footing and get to know the children. She spent her mornings helping with chores, feeding the chickens, mending fences, and tending to the garden, and her afternoons were often filled with smaller, More personal interactions, reading to the children under the shade of a sprawling oak, teaching the younger ones how to knit and helping the older ones with their schoolwork. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. A feeling that she could matter in someone else's life, the children. Initially shy and uncertain of this new woman in their home, gradually warmed to her. The youngest, a curious boy with a shock of unruly hair, would follow her wherever she went, asking endless questions about the plants she tended or the animals she fed. The middle child, a quiet girl with a mischievous glint in her eyes, would challenge her with small dares, testing her patience and boundaries. And the eldest, a responsible teenager still mourning the absence of their mother, seemed cautious yet slowly sought her approval in subtle ways. Each interaction brought new lessons for both the children and for her. She began to see that motherhood was not solely about biology, it was about presence, guidance, and unwavering care. The cowboy watched all of this quietly, often from a distance, his expression calm but attentive. He recognized the subtle shifts, the way the children's laughter grew more frequent, how their shoulders relaxed when she was around, and the way she carried herself with growing confidence. There was no rush to label their relationship, no push for an immediate bond. Instead, he allowed her to settle in naturally, knowing that trust and connection were built through consistency and genuine care. Evenings were a time of shared domesticity. She helped prepare dinner, teaching the children to chop vegetables and stir pots with care. They talked, laughed, and occasionally bickered, the kind of ordinary chaos that made a house feel like a home. The cowboy would sometimes join in, his presence quiet but steady, guiding without dominating, listening without judgment. Through these small, shared moments, the rhythm of ranch life began to feel less intimidating and more like a space where she could breathe, belong, and contribute. Yet, despite the growing comfort, a shadow of doubt still lingered. In quiet moments alone, she would reflect on her past doctor's visits, harsh diagnoses, and the sense of failure that came with the knowledge that she couldn't have children of her own. She feared that, eventually, this truth might push her out of this newfound sanctuary. Could she truly love these children as if they were her own? Would the cowboy see her as enough, or would her inability to give him more children drive a wedge between them? These fears were persistent, whispering in the back of her mind even as she smiled and laughed with the children during the day. But the subtle victories began to outweigh her fears. A child's laughter at a joke she made, a small hug from the youngest in the quiet of the evening, or the cowboy's approving glance from across the room. All of these reinforced the truth she was slowly learning. She had a place here. The ranch, with its sprawling fields, weathered barns, and warm hearths, was no longer just a stop on her journey. It was becoming home, a place where her presence was valued, where her efforts mattered, and where love could take many forms. By the end of her first full week, the once cautious newcomer had begun to feel like part of the rhythm of ranch life. She was no longer just an observer or helper. She was woven into the daily tapestry of work, care, and connection. Though uncertainty and fear still lingered at the edges, they were tempered by the growing bonds with the children and the quiet, steady presence of the cowboy who seemed to understand her in ways she had not thought possible. For the first time in years, she began to believe that perhaps this unexpected detour in her life could lead to something beautiful, something lasting and whole. Life on the ranch had begun to feel like a rhythm she could trust. The children laughed, chores flowed with a satisfying predictability, and even the cowboy's quiet presence had become a source of reassurance rather than intimidation. And yet, beneath the surface of this newfound stability, memories and insecurities that she had long tried to bury began to stir. One afternoon, as she knelt in the garden, her hands covered in soil and sweat beading on her forehead, a simple question from the eldest child triggered an unexpected wave of emotion. "Will you be our mom forever?" The teenager asked, eyes wide and hopeful. Her heart stuttered. The words, innocent as they were, hit her like a stone. She forced a smile, bending to plant the seedlings more firmly, hoping the children wouldn't notice the sudden tightness in her chest. I'll be here for as long as you'll have me," she answered carefully, her voice lighter than she felt. But inside, the familiar ache returned, the fear that she could never truly belong in a role defined by motherhood. The worry that her inability to bear children might one day make her an outsider in a family she had grown to love. That night, she sat by the window of the small guest room the cowboy had offered her, the soft glow of lantern light illuminating the pages of a worn journal. Writing had always been her refuge, a way to untangle her thoughts and fears, and now she needed it more than ever. She recounted her past, the years of disappointment, the silent grief of empty doctor's offices, and the way friends and family had sometimes looked at her with pity. It wasn't just the inability to have children, it was the shame and self-doubt that accompanied it, the nagging belief that she was somehow incomplete. Memories of past relationships began to surface as well. She recalled men who had loved her superficially but had recoiled at the thought of a future without children. She remembered the sting of rejection, the cruel words that had chipped away at her self-esteem, and the nights spent crying alone, wishing for a family that seemed forever out of reach. Even here, in a place that felt safe, she felt the old wounds pressing against her heart, threatening to undo the fragile sense of belonging she had begun to build. The next morning, the weight of her past made even simple interactions difficult. When a child stumbled or argued, she found herself reacting sharply, frustrated at her own inadequacies rather than the children's behavior. The cowboy noticed her tension and, in his usual quiet way, approached her while she tended to the horses. "You've got a lot on your mind," he said gently, leaning against the fence. His voice was steady, free of judgment, but full of concern. She shook her head, attempting to brush off the moment, but the tears she had been holding back betrayed her. "I'm not like other women," she whispered, the confession spilling out before she could stop it. "I can't have children. I've tried, and I've failed. And I don't want to hurt anyone, but I can't help feeling broken." The cowboy remained silent, his presence a steady anchor as she poured out her heart. And then he spoke, not with pity, but with a quiet, unwavering truth. "I know who you are," he said simply. "And you're not broken. You've got love in you, more than you know. The kids, they don't need someone perfect. They need someone who cares. And you already do." Hearing his words, she felt a small shift inside her. The wounds of the past hadn't disappeared, but for the first time, she began to see that love and family were not defined solely by biology or past failures. Perhaps, she thought, her past pain could coexist with the possibility of happiness. Perhaps here, on this ranch, she could find a place where she mattered and where her past didn't define her future. By the end of the day, the tension in her chest had eased slightly. She returned to the children with a softer smile, a steadier hand, and a quiet. As the days turned into weeks, the rhythm of ranch life settled into a comfortable routine. She had grown more confident in her role, helping the children with chores, schoolwork, and bedtime stories, and even managing to find quiet moments with the cowboy, moments that were not filled with conversation, but with shared glances and the unspoken understanding that they were learning to trust each other. Yet beneath his calm demeanor, she sensed that the cowboy carried a weight of his own, a story he hadn't yet shared. It was late one evening, the sky painted with streaks of orange and violet as the sun dipped below the horizon. She found him on the porch, sitting silently with a cup of steaming coffee, staring out at the rolling fields. The children were asleep in the main house, the soft creak of the old boards beneath her feet the only sound as she approached. For a moment, neither spoke, letting the quiet stretch between them. Finally, she hesitated, then asked softly, "You never talk much about your wife, or how it's been raising all these children alone." The cowboy's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, but there was a flicker of emotion in his eyes, a mixture of sorrow and pride. "She was the heart of this place," he said quietly. Before she passed, we dreamed of a big family. These kids were part of that dream. They're my world now, and I tried to do right by them every day." His voice was steady, but there was a rawness in it, the kind of pain that comes from loss. She sat down beside him, hesitant but wanting to bridge the gap he had so carefully maintained. "It must be hard," she whispered, "losing someone you love and trying to be both mother and father." He nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "It is," he admitted. "There are nights when it feels unbearable. But I learned early on that these kids need stability, love, and guidance more than anything. They don't need me to be perfect, just present. And I've done my best to give them that." For the first time, he let himself speak openly about the fears he had carried for years, the anxiety of raising children alone, the guilt of not being able to shield them from life's hardships, and the quiet loneliness that lingered even in the midst of a bustling household. He confessed that he had been cautious in letting anyone into his life since his wife's death, wary of trusting someone who might leave or judge him for the family he already had. Hearing his story, she felt a new layer of connection to him. His vulnerabilities mirrored her own, the fears, the past wounds, the uncertainties, but instead of pushing them apart, they seemed to draw them closer. She realized that the walls he had built around himself were not meant to keep her out, but to protect both him and his children from further pain. Then, with a small, almost shy smile, he added, "I didn't expect to find someone like you here. Someone who cares, who sees the children as they are, and maybe someone who doesn't need to change what I've already built." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken meaning, before he continued, "I don't need another mother for them. I don't need more children. I need someone who can be part of this life as it is. And somehow, I think that might be you." Her heart swelled, a mix of relief, hope, and something tender that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. The fear of inadequacy, the shadow that had followed her since the day she learned she couldn't have children, seemed to lighten. Here was a man who valued her for her heart, her care, and her presence, not for her ability to fulfill a biological role. That night, under the vast expanse of the star-filled sky, they sat together on the porch, sharing silence and occasional words, a new understanding forming between them. The cowboy's secret, the pain of loss, the weight of responsibility, and the fear of opening his heart again was no longer a barrier. Instead, it became the bridge that allowed her to step closer, to see that love and family were not limited to traditional expectations, but were built through connection, trust, and shared life. In revealing his past, he had not only invited her into his world but also offered her a glimpse of the future, a family that could thrive on love, understanding, and acceptance, even if it defied the usual definitions. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine that she truly belonged here, alongside him and his children, in a life that could be unexpectedly beautiful. By now, she had settled comfortably into the rhythm of the ranch, but it was in the quiet, unplanned moments that her bond with the children truly began to deepen. These were the moments that weren't dictated by chores or schedules, moments that revealed who they were as individuals and allowed her to see herself reflected in their lives. She discovered that motherhood wasn't about titles or biology. It was about showing up, listening, and nurturing love in the small, everyday gestures. One sunny afternoon, she found herself sitting under the shade of the old oak tree with the youngest child on her lap, tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. He chattered endlessly about his imaginary adventures with the animals on the ranch, and she listened, encouraging his creativity with soft laughter and playful questions. The child's eyes lit up, and he leaned against her without hesitation, a silent declaration of trust and comfort. In that simple interaction, she felt a warmth that had been absent from her life for far too long, a quiet certainty that she could make a difference, even without giving birth. A middle child, the quiet but mischievous one, began to test her boundaries in subtle ways. Sometimes it was refusing to follow instructions, other times it was playful teasing. At first, she felt the familiar pang of insecurity, worrying that she might fail at this too. But she learned quickly that consistency, patience, and humor were the keys to connection. One evening, after a long day of chores, she taught the child to ride a horse. There were tumbles and laughter, shouts of excitement, and eventually a triumphant smile when the child rode a short distance alone. She realized that motherhood could be measured in these small victories, moments where guidance and encouragement brought joy and confidence to someone else's life. Even the eldest, cautious and protective, began to let her in. They would sit together in the evenings, sorting feed or patching fences, talking quietly about school, dreams, and fears. She didn't try to replace their mother, nor did she overstep boundaries. Instead, she offered a steady presence, a patient listener who cared deeply. Gradually, the walls around the eldest child's heart softened, and subtle gestures, a shared smile, an offer of help, a whispered "thank you," became signs of trust and acceptance. The cowboy watched these interactions quietly, recognizing the subtle shifts. He had been wary at first, protective of his children's hearts, but seeing her patience, kindness, and unwavering care reassured him. She wasn't just an outsider trying to step into a family. She was becoming an integral part of it, someone who could love them as they were, without judgment or expectation. The children responded to her authenticity, the way she was fully present for each of them, listening to their joys and fears with the same care she had once reserved only for herself. One evening, as they all gathered around the dinner table, the children were unusually talkative, sharing stories of the day's adventures. She watched the cowboy glance at her, a soft smile on his face, and realized that in this life on the ranch had settled into a steady rhythm. But it was during moments of unexpected crisis that true character was revealed and hers was about to be tested. One late afternoon, dark clouds rolled in over the hills, and a sudden storm swept across the property with fierce winds and heavy rain. The children were inside the house, but one of the horses, a spirited mare that had yet to fully trust her, panicked in the corral. The cowboy was nearby, but he was tending to other animals, and the mare was dangerously close to escaping. Risking injury to herself and damage to the fence, without thinking, she sprinted toward the corral, rain soaking her clothes, mud clinging to her boots. She called softly to the horse, moving cautiously despite the wind whipping around her. Her heart pounded not just with fear, but with determination. This was more than a task, it was a test of her courage, her ability to step into the chaos and protect life. The mare tossed her head, neighing wildly, and for a moment it seemed impossible to calm her. But she remembered the patience and gentle persistence that had brought her closer to the children, and she applied the same principles here. Speaking softly, offering her hand, moving deliberately, she slowly coaxed the horse into a corner where it could be secured safely. The cowboy arrived just as she latched the gate, his eyes wide with surprise. "I didn't think you'd manage it on your own," he admitted, a mixture of relief and admiration in his voice. She shook the rein from her hair, smiling despite the adrenaline, and realized that she had proven to herself something vital. She was capable of handling challenges, of stepping up when it mattered most. That evening, the storm subsided, leaving a calm stillness over the ranch. The children, having witnessed part of the chaos from the safety of the porch, were filled with admiration. The youngest ran up to her, eyes shining, and threw his small arms around her waist. "You saved the horse!" he exclaimed. The middle child nodded, shyly echoing the sentiment. Even the eldest, who rarely displayed overt emotion, offered a quiet, approving glance. In that moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of belonging, the unspoken acknowledgement that she was part of this family. Not just as a helper, but as someone who could be trusted, relied upon, and loved. The cowboy joined her later on the porch, drying his coat and settling into a rocking chair. "You handled that better than I could have expected," he said quietly, a rare vulnerability in his tone. "I was worried, not about the horse, but about you stepping in. You didn't hesitate. That's remarkable." She met his gaze, her chest swelling with pride and relief, feeling the weight of his words more profoundly than she had anticipated. That night, as she lay in her small room, she reflected on the events of the day. The fear and uncertainty that had once accompanied every challenge had been replaced with a quiet confidence. She had faced danger, made decisions under pressure, and cared for something or someone other than herself. And in doing so, she realized the depth of her own courage and compassion. The turning point wasn't just about a storm or a frightened horse. It was about the realization that she had value, that she could contribute meaningfully to this family, and that her inability to have children did not define her worth. The cowboy's quiet praise, the children's admiration, and her own sense of accomplishment combined to create a profound shift in her self-perception. From that day forward, she carried herself with a new sense of confidence. The bond with the children deepened further, and the cowboy's respect and affection grew more visible. The crisis had tested her, yes, but it had also shown her, in undeniable terms, that she belonged here. She wasn't an outsider. She wasn't incomplete. She was a vital part of his family, capable of love, courage, and unwavering care. And for the first time, she truly believed that she could remain here, fully accepted and cherished, no matter what the future held. The days on the ranch had grown warmer and quieter in the late afternoon sun. The children played freely in the yard, their laughter carrying across the fields, while the cowboy worked alongside her repairing a fence that had been battered by the previous storm. There was a comfortable rhythm to their companionship, now a silent understanding that had grown from shared work, shared responsibility, and the subtle intimacy of small gestures. Yet, beneath her newfound confidence, a shadow of doubt still lingered. That evening, after the children had been tucked into bed and the house had quieted to a soft hum of wind and distant animals, she found herself walking to the porch where the cowboy was sitting. He looked up, offering a gentle smile, and patted the chair beside him. She hesitated for a moment, her heart fluttering with a mixture of nervousness and longing. She had never allowed herself to speak of her deepest fears to anyone, especially not her inability to have children, but tonight, the quiet intimacy of the ranch and the steady presence of the man beside her gave her courage. I need to tell you something," she began, her voice low, almost trembling. The cowboy's eyes met hers, calm and attentive, silently encouraging her to continue. She drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of fear and shame pressing on her chest. "I can't have children," she admitted, the words tasting like ash on her tongue. "I've been told, and I've tried to accept it, but some days it feels like the world is reminding me what I'll never have." The cowboy listened without interruption, his face unreadable yet open, a steady anchor for her vulnerability. The fear that she would be judged, rejected, or pitied loomed over her, but she pressed on, emboldened by the trust she had developed. "I love your children," she continued, her voice catching. "I care for them deeply. But I keep wondering, will you see me as enough? Will you? Will they? He reached out, placing a strong but gentle hand over hers. I don't expect you to be anyone else, he said softly. You don't need to give me more children. You don't need to replace anyone. You've already become part of this family in ways that matter far more than biology ever could. His voice carried a certainty that soothed the ache in her chest, a reassurance that her worth was not tied to her ability to bear children. She let herself exhale, tears brimming but no longer a sign of shame, rather, of relief. For the first time, she could speak her truth without fear of losing her place in this family. The cowboy's hand remained over hers, a comforting presence, grounding her in the reality that she was valued, accepted, and loved for who she was. The children. They don't need someone perfect, he added. They need someone who loves them, who shows up, who cares. And you've done that every single day. That's what matters. That's what makes you family. His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, dispelling the lingering doubts and insecurities she had carried for so long. She felt a lightness settle over her heart, a shift that seemed almost tangible. The fear that had shadowed her interactions with the children, the guilt and inadequacy she had felt in her own past, began to dissolve. In that quiet, starlit moment, she realized that vulnerability could be strength, that admitting her fears did not make her weak, and that love could transcend traditional expectations of family. They sat together in companionable silence, listening to the soft creaks of the ranch and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. The confession had not changed the dynamic between them, it had deepened it. She felt closer to him, and in that closeness, she found a sense of safety and belonging that she had longed for all her life. By the end of the night, she knew she had taken an important step, not just in opening her heart to the cowboy, but in accepting herself. For the first time, she felt truly seen, and she allowed herself to hope that love complex. By now, the ranch had settled into a comforting rhythm of work, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. The children had grown more attached to her with each passing day, running to her with stories, questions, and the occasional mischievous prank. She, in turn, had learned their personalities, their needs, and the unique ways each of them expressed love. But beyond the daily routines, a deeper transformation had begun, one that extended to her heart and the place she had come to occupy in this family. It started subtly, in the small interactions that now felt natural. The youngest child would crawl onto her lap while she read aloud from a well-worn storybook, resting his head against her shoulder without hesitation. The middle child would seek her guidance during chores or ask her opinion on small matters, showing a trust that she hadn't thought she would earn. Even the eldest, cautious and protective at first, now smiled at her encouragement and quietly sought her approval when tackling difficult tasks. Each gesture reinforced a growing certainty. She was not an outsider here. She belonged. The cowboy, too, had begun to let his guard down. The quiet man who had once spoken sparingly now shared more of himself, stories from his past, jokes that made the children laugh, and moments of gentle teasing directed at her, which she found herself secretly enjoying. Their conversations had grown deeper, full of shared hopes and mutual respect. One evening, as they watched the sun dip behind the hills, he reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, his touch gentle and deliberate. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the weight of trust, admiration, and unspoken affection. For her part, she realized that love was not just a feeling reserved for romantic gestures or dramatic declarations. It was in the quiet consistency of showing up, in the warmth of shared laughter, and in the willingness to embrace the imperfections of life and people. She began to see herself not as someone incomplete or lacking, but as a woman capable of nurturing, protecting, and loving wholly. She had found a place where her past wounds did not define her, where her inability to bear children did not diminish her role in creating a family filled with care and joy. A Faraday. Pivotal moment came during a Sunday morning breakfast. The children, full of energy, had insisted on helping her prepare pancakes. Flour dusted the air and smudged faces were everywhere. The cowboy joined in, flipping pancakes and teasing the children when they tried to help in their own chaotic ways. She looked around the room, the children laughing, the cowboy smiling at their antics, and felt a rush of emotion she had long thought impossible for herself. She belonged here. She was loved, and she loved them in return. Later, as the day settled into a warm afternoon, the cowboy pulled her aside for a quiet conversation. "I've watched you," he said, his voice steady but soft, "and I've seen the way you've become part of this family. The kids love you, and so do I." His words were simple, but to her, they were everything. She felt a release of the fear she had carried for so long, a letting go of the belief that she could never be enough. In that moment, she knew that acceptance had blossomed into love deep, patient, and enduring. The beauty of this love was its quiet power. There were no grand declarations, no sweeping gestures. Instead, it was built from everyday acts of care, respect, and trust. She had found a partner in the cowboy, children who accepted her without condition, and a home where her heart could finally rest. The walls she had built around herself, brick by brick, had crumbled under the steady, unwavering presence of a family that saw her value and embraced it fully. By nightfall, she sat on the porch with the cowboy, the children asleep inside, and felt an overwhelming sense of completeness. The past, with all its pain and disappointments, had led her here. And here, she realized, was where love not defined by biology, circumstance, or expectation could flourish in its most authentic and fulfilling form. She had found acceptance, belonging, and a love that was patient, kind, and enduring, and she knew that nothing could ever take it away. The morning sun spilled golden light across the ranch, illuminating the dew-drenched fields and the sturdy buildings that had become home. Birds sang in the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of hay and wildflowers. The ranch, once intimidating and unfamiliar, now felt like a place of safety, warmth, and belonging, a tangible reflection of the life she had worked to embrace and the love she had nurtured in return. Today, more than ever, felt like a turning point, a true new beginning for her and for the family she had come to love. The children were up early, bustling around the kitchen as they prepared breakfast under her gentle guidance. Flour dusted the countertops, laughter echoed off the walls, and the air was filled with the easy rhythm of domestic life. The youngest clutched her hand as he ran to set the table, while the middle child carefully measured ingredients, concentrating fiercely yet sneaking glances at her with a playful grin. Even the eldest moved quietly around the kitchen, helping in small but meaningful ways, their trust and comfort in her presence unmistakable. Watching them, she realized how far she had come, from a woman uncertain of her place in the world to someone who was indispensable in this household, valued and loved for the heart she brought into it, outside. The cowboy tended to the animals, his movements steady and confident, yet there was a lightness in his step she had not seen before. He caught her gaze across the yard and offered a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. There were no grand declarations, no elaborate plans announced in the morning light. Everything about this moment reflected the deep, unspoken bond they had built over weeks of work, patience, and trust. He didn't need to say he loved her, the quiet gestures, the shared responsibilities, and the laughter of the children were proof enough. As the day unfolded, they worked side by side, repairing fences, feeding animals, and tending to the garden. She felt the familiar sense of purpose she had longed for, a life where her efforts mattered, where she could contribute meaningfully, and where love wasn't measured by what she could not give, but by what she could offer fully and wholeheartedly. The children ran freely, safe in the knowledge that she was present, attentive, and caring. She guided them gently, correcting when necessary, praising when deserved, and laughing with them in every unguarded moment of joy. Later, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the cowboy approached her with a quiet smile. "You belong here," he said simply, his words carrying the weight of truth and affirmation. She returned the smile, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, a combination of love, gratitude, and relief. The insecurities that had once haunted her, the fears of inadequacy, of being unworthy, of never finding a place in a family, felt distant and almost unbelievable now. Here, she had found not only acceptance but also a sense of home and belonging that no words could fully capture. That evening, the family gathered around the fire. The children shared stories, their faces glowing with excitement, and she listened, chiming in with laughter and encouragement. The cowboy joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement that they were partners in this life. There was a completeness here, a family united not by blood alone, but by love, trust, and shared experiences. She realized that her past, with all its pain and disappointments, had not defined her. Instead, it had guided her to a place of resilience, empathy, and profound joy. As night fell, the stars blanketed the sky in brilliant light. She